Thank y'all. Welcome to Myers Park United Methodist Church. My name is Taylor Pride Barefoot, and I'm one of the pastors here. And I am so glad that y'all are joining us tonight. I am extra excited about this evening because I just graduated from Duke Divinity School, and Dr. Barfield was one of my professors. He was actually my advisor, and I remembered when every time I told people that I had Dr. Barfield as an advisor, I kind of felt like a celebrity because he's so sought after in the divinity school. And when we started talking about beauty with Dr. Howell, I instantly was thinking about one of my favorite classes I took at Duke, which was called Beauty, Suffering, and the Cross. That was a deeply formative course for me. And one of the reasons it was so formative was because we talk about suffering a lot, we experience suffering, and we talk about hope a lot, but having the experience of being with someone like Dr. Barfield, who, if you read the bio, he is a pediatric oncologist. He knows suffering. He lives suffering in his day-to-day life, and so when he proclaimed hope, it was so much more real and meaningful to me, and it just transformed the whole way I read the gospel. And so I think it's also been evident in the way that we've talked about beauty. We can't know beauty without being people who are broken, and I think our evening tonight should illuminate some of those things. So I'm so glad that we get to hear a conversation between Dr. Howell and Dr. Barfield.
Thank you, Taylor. What grade did you give? Don't. I'm sure it was high, great. We owe a word of thanks, by the way. Welcome, first of all. Thank you for being here. We owe a word of thanks to Stacy Nicholson. Stacy, raise your hand. You see Stacy up in the choir. You don't know who he is. He's also a pediatric oncologist, and he's the head of Levine Children's Hospital. And he called me and said, could we work out a deal and both of us be able to use Ray while he's here? So he's speaking tomorrow, right, at the Levine Children's Hospital, which is a great thing. This will be better tonight than that.
We'll see.
So, it's great to have you here. And, yeah. And I have some questions, and we're going to try to leave some time at the end for you guys to have some questions. First, let's just a little get acquainted kind of stuff. So where are you from?
I'm from Atlanta, Georgia.
You grew up there?
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you go to school?
Which kind of school?
Yeah.
I went to Walton High School, and then Rhodes College, and I went to medical school and grad school at Emory and did my residency there. And then my fellowship in oncology at St. Jude.
Emory, undefeated all time in football. Calm down. That's all right. That's great. And you've been teaching at Duke for how long now?
12 years.
For 12 years. And you were at our church before. Dr. Melanie Dobson had a program on faith and medicine, and Ray came down. I was out of town for that, so I'm glad I'm here today. And Ray's amazing. He's a pediatric oncologist. He's a theologian. He's a novelist. He's a poet. I hate guys like this. Like, they're good at everything. And I want to start by asking you about, this is a writing question. This isn't a cancer suffering question. This is a writing question, because you're a great writer. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, Ray wrote this book called Wager, which is about beauty and suffering. It's short, but it'll take you a while, because there's a lot in there. But in it, you have sentences like this. Listen to this. Suffering relentlessly pulls on the loose threads of beauty's tapestry. This is one of the ways that I'm jarred awake to being in the world. Waves of suffering break on the rock of beauty's outlandish ta-da in the middle of a world full of agony. Beauty breaks on the rock of pain. How long did it take you to put that together?
I don't remember writing it. I should read this.
It's pretty good.
You know, I don't write then just send the thing off. It takes me forever, because I started writing in medical school when my mind, I just started feeling something not being exercised because of the nature of what I was having to do in school to pass the USMLE Part 1, 2, and 3, and memorizing and memorizing and memorizing. But I had no context to fit anything in, so I was just organizing pieces as well as I could. And I started writing to work on just my imagination, which mattered a lot to me. But I would only write 30 minutes a day. And I would do it. I had a few rules, which was 30 minutes a day, show up. And if I missed it, which I did maybe 10 times in 15 years, but I had a rule, if I miss it, I'm not allowed to make it up the next day, because then I just start getting more and more behind. And so that habit became my way of writing, just coming to it in short bits. And I started discovering that things would work on their own in the back of my mind. Finally, when I thought I wanted to write something more than just one poem or a paragraph, I had to make another rule, which is that I wasn't allowed to revise a single sentence until I had written the last sentence of the first draft, because I was so driven by this perfectionism that I could never get past the first or second paragraph. And then I would just let it sit. So sometimes things will just sit there for a year or two, and I'll just keep living. And then I'll come back to it and begin to read it as though someone else had written it. And there's always a lot to correct. And that sentence probably came from that. I'm like, who wrote this? This is awful. And I fix it.
It's pretty good. There's seats, guys. Come on around. Yeah. One of the reasons that I asked this, I was thinking about a few years back for Christian Century, I wrote a review of Sam Wells' book, The Nazareth Manifesto. And I'm writing this review, and I wrote this sentence that just so got on my nerves. And I put, Sam writes well. And I crossed it out. It sounded condescending or something, right? So we tend to think that writing is some kind of, it's like it's a craft, it's a skill. I don't think that's right. I think if Sam writes well, it's not because he writes well, it's because he thinks well, because he thinks deeply. With yours, I think, I'm headed to something with this. I think it's because you think well and you think deeply, but I bet it's because you pay attention and listen to the heart of things. Do you think that's right?
I think almost all of it is paying attention. Almost all of it. It's a combination of paying attention and not knowing anything. That combination works really well because the writing becomes a discovery process. I'm not a trained theologian. I fake it because I'm at the div school. And so, so I come without a long history of knowing how theology has evolved. I've learned things while I've been there. So there's a sense for me of writing as a discovery process. And there are many times when I don't know what I'm going to write. And as I write, I start to find what I'm going to write. And I also find places where I'm like, that's just not right, kind of like with your sentence. But until it's on the piece of paper, I'm not sure exactly what its form is going to be. And it's like being a potter, but not having any clay. You have to make your own clay. And so first drafts for me are sort of like making the clay. And then most of writing is rewriting for me and shaping and reshaping by feel.
So I think I've been with a lot of people when they've had very hard conversations with a physician. And so I always say words matter, and words always matter. But in those settings, words really matter, don't you think?
Oh, yes.
Do you ever get it, just the word, in the kind of agony of what you're having to communicate? Do you feel like the words ever are wrong, inadequate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I put my foot in my mouth often enough that I warn people I may put my foot in my mouth. And if I do, I'll ask them. I'll say, look, if I start going off the rails, if I get lost, if I wander into a space that I clearly shouldn't have or that you're not comfortable with, stop me and help me do this, And there's something about being humble about my own fallibility, which I've become extremely aware of over the years, that allows me to partner with families and with kids who want to talk with me. And so, yeah, I do get lost. But it's interesting, paying attention to words in writing. I almost never write about doctors or about medical situations. I almost always write about something else. But just the habit of caring about how a thing is said has helped me to pay attention to the force and the shape and the impact of words that I say. And it requires not just paying attention to the words I'm saying, though. Many times a family will tell me the kind of language that means something to them, and they'll tell me how they need to hear a certain thing. They'll tell me often enough that now, when I'm just getting to know a family and I don't yet know, I'll ask them, when someone's talking about difficult things, how do you like to participate in that conversation? It's never going to be easy, but is there anything you can tell me about how you listen to difficult things that'll help me to say them in a way where we can be partners in this? And very often, they'll tell me, and they tell me a lot. So starting by listening is one way to figure out how to respond so that it truly is a back and forth and a conversation. One of the biggest things in medicine that I see as a problem is failing to do that first part, listening. And so I see physicians, well-intended, very non-malicious, good people, walk into the room already knowing the agenda and already knowing what needs to be said and already knowing what the right decision is and already knowing all of these things. And then they bestow these insights onto the families and are stunned when the families are bewildered or frustrated or upset or still befuddled by, and it's something that has, just in observing it, has made me aware not just of words as a conveyor of information, which is a sort of mechanical way of thinking of language, a utilitarian way, an instrumental way. But if we're going to say that words matter, part of why they matter is because they move our hearts. And so if I tell someone just a very difficult, simple sentence, those cells that your doctor saw under the microscope, this is going to be hard because I looked at them and those were leukemia cells, which is a kind of cancer. When I say that sentence, there is a life before that sentence, and there is life after that sentence. And so part of partnering in communication is recognizing that the other person needs a moment to breathe, to take in an impossible thing. This cannot be true. Last week, we were just at the beach having fun. This cannot be true. How do you hear an impossible thing that even though it's impossible, is still true. And so I will stop. And I've discovered that by pausing and even saying, when you want me to continue talking, just tell me. But I'm going to sit here quietly until you're ready. The silence in the room is also powerful. And they will breathe. And they will do whatever it is they need to do inside themselves or between themselves. And then they'll tell me, okay, I think I'm ready. And then I'll continue. But that's a gesture of humanity towards this person who has just had the hardest thing dropped into their lap. That's a moment that needs to be recognized. And I consider that powerful and a very important part of speech. It's not just the multiplication of words. It's also paying attention to silence out of love for the other person and out of reverence for the weight of the thing that you're now talking about. Yeah.
So in your novel, The Book of Colors, you got me way out of order already with my schedule, which is fine.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
I try to stop talking. You wouldn't believe how hard it is for me.
Trust me.
She knows.
I know. So there's a paragraph here where you say, it's feeling afraid without having a name for it or seeing anything in your mind that makes you afraid. That's the darkness that is so dark, even the light in your mind is dark, and you wonder if you can dream anymore. I mean, when I've seen people receive bad news, the life before and after, logic, the words almost don't matter any longer. So I'm thinking about something that theologically at Div School we've talked about. So this guy, Walter Brueggemann, theologian, friend, has talked about the demise of lament. Once upon a time in Israel, you had the prayers of lament, and you would cry out to God in agony. Job did this. Jesus does this on the cross. And somehow in Christianity, we came to this, like, you're not supposed to cry out. Everything is supposed. You did this great podcast with Kate Bowler, who's a theologian at Duke, with stage 4 colon cancer, of all things. And she wrote a really lovely book where she talks about the way people say pithy theological things, not crying out of how bad it is, but things like, God won't give you more than you can bear. All this just, and we've talked about this as a church many times. Don't do this ever to people. What I'm struck by, so in this podcast with Kate, I brought that for you.
Thank you.
She tells about after she was diagnosed with this cancer that you went over and visited with her and her parents, and she said the most moving thing was not any science that you gave them, but that you said something like, with real pain in your voice, this is awful.
Mm-hmm. And that is acknowledging the truth of a thing is crucial. Until we're telling the truth about a situation, it's very difficult to do anything with the situation. But having said that, you have to take care with the pace and pay attention to what the person is experiencing as you tell the truth. Because, it's the same with cancer. Many of us will avoid paying attention to things that are on our bodies because maybe it's cancer, but if I don't get it looked at, maybe it'll just go away. And if you do come to a place where the doctor tells you the truth about this cancer and you're going to get chemotherapy, you can't have all the chemotherapy at one time. you need it paced. It's the only way to survive the chemotherapy. And so I think that telling the truth is different than saying true words. Because truth is more of an event. And if the event is occurring, it has to be able to be received. But if I am numb with pain, and I cannot take one more thing, then if you're telling me something, be gentle. Pay attention to my messages to you that I am really suffering here. And that's I think, crucial. And this is tricky. I mean, I'm not saying that I know all the ins and outs of this, because there are places for so-called tough love, right? There are also urgent moments. There are times when, scared or not scared, you need to hear this truth, because if we don't act in the next 24 hours, it's not going to matter anymore. And so, yes, of course, but that takes some judgment, and that also takes paying attention. It also, I believe, takes being aware of the impact of what's happening as you move in an urgent situation. But for the most part, I think that just being aware that it takes time to assimilate a true thing, but if the true thing's not assimilated, who cares what your words were? You may feel better, hey, I told the truth. I said the hard things. But if a person's incapable of taking them in, or not able to take them in the way that you said them, or at the pace that you said them, then you can go off and feel good about that. But if you're there to be with the person, instead of accomplishing the saying of a hard thing, you have to modulate some. And the last thing I'll say about that is that I know this from failing repeatedly. Early in medical practice, most of us in the early parts don't feel big enough to inhabit the role. Many of us, certainly myself, when I would walk into a room and have to say one of these lines in the sand kind of things, I didn't feel up to it. I was like, who put me in charge of this? And so I would say it, I would say the words, but I was trying to get through it. And this is not uncommon. The only advice that I got in medical school about saying difficult things is never let the family get between you and the door, which is horrible advice. Absolutely horrible advice. But it's advice that is rooted in a kind of pain, a kind of panic, a kind of, I said the words, and so therefore the thing has been said. And part of maturing as a pastor or a physician or a nurse or a friend or anyone who has to say difficult things is being willing to sit there in the pain. That will do something inside the room and inside the person that you're talking to that will allow more of the truth to come in at a pace that the person can endure.
So there are kinds of medical news and kinds of medical news. I had foot surgery in November, and the doctor, I'm thinking about suing him because of his words. When I went, he said, he looked at the scans and he said, this is advanced arthritis. I knew that. And then he added, this is associated with old age. Is that a medical thing?
Absolutely not. Yeah, old age is just, 25 years older than whatever I am.
So that's not a life before that news and life after that kind of news. So it's a different kind of thing. And Ray, I don't know all these people tonight, but I know many of them. And a lot of these folks are people who are pretty good at organizing and arranging their world so that things go well. And I think they're naive in this, and I think they view doctors as kind of the last line of defense in that. Like, if things start going bad, doctors, they're omniscient. They've been to med school.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
They can fix. There's always the expectation that this can be fixed, right? But then, I mean, to me, I kept calling you a pediatric oncologist, and to me, it's just jarring to put those two words together. Because the word pediatric feels fun, happy children, and oncologist sounds like, oh my God, I'm scared to death, right? And so my dad is nearing death at age 94, and people are like, of course. But when it's a child, it's kind of the ultimate test of humanity, the vulnerability of all of us. How do you keep, well, let me tell you a story and have you react to it. I'm talking too much, I'll stop after this. I started this in a sermon yesterday. It was years ago, my first encounter with a pediatric oncologist at Duke. I got a call when it was my day off, and the phone rang, and the chaplain at the hospital was somebody that I knew, and she said, come to the hospital now. So I did. And there's a family there that I was very close to, and they had an infant that I had baptized a couple of weeks before, and they had just done some scans and diagnosed her with some malignancy that was intertwined in her spinal cord. They said, she has to go to Duke now. So they took off. I followed in the car. And when I got there, I just sat on the floor. I just sat in the corner and cried. Mm-hmm. And I thought, like, what a waste, right? And a chaplain came in and seemed to know how to talk about God, because this chaplain said, God will heal your child. I didn't know that. God did not heal their child despite prayers. But then the pediatric oncologist came in, and I wished I'd gone to med school, because he had a plan. He could do something, and I'm like the God guy in the room, and all I could do is sit there and cry. So talk about God and childhood suffering, which most people think of as unimaginable, because they associate God with things going well. God protects us. We pray for God to protect us. You may be new to theology, but talk about that.
There is, so one thing, we were just talking about, I have on a lot of the questions that I used to want precise answers in propositional form with numbered premises that ended with, a conclusion. I raised the white flag on that. And this is one of the places where lament, I think, is crucial, where recovering the sense of grieving a thing instead of going straight to explaining a thing is so important. When a child has a brain tumor wrapped around, that's just sad. That is tragic. That's heartbreaking. And I would much rather open up the Psalms and read someone who is at least being honest, saying, how long, O Lord? How long?
Why have you forsaken me?
Why have you forsaken me? And there's good precedent for quoting that. Because the one who's at the center of our faith prayed, and then prayed again, and then prayed again that this cup pass. And it didn't. And from the cross, Jesus gave a word of profound hope to one of the other people who is being crucified. Today you will be with me in paradise. A word of incredible encouragement. Death is not the end of the story. And even though you're hanging on this cross for things that you may be weeping over right now, I'm telling you, there is grace, there is forgiveness, there is hope, and I will see you on the other side. And the same Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken? Where are you? And so for me, holding those things together, side by side, without having to turn one into the other, without having to only try to get God off the hook by explaining things, or despairing in the other direction, where there is no hope, there is no possibility, it's all for naught. I think instead, looking at Jesus on the cross, who holds both of those things true, that's his experience. That surely gives us permission to be honest about what we're feeling. And one reason I think that this is important to say and to think about, especially when we're talking about something like the juxtaposition of beauty and suffering, that can very quickly turn into a kind of denial of lament, trying to make everything pretty when it's not. No, looking at beauty and suffering side by side is a very different kind of thing. It's not turning something that is terrible into something that's pretty. The shortest way, though, I think, to finding the truth of a situation, the whole truth of a situation, is being honest about what you're experiencing. And that's one of the reasons that, for me, I am so grateful that Jesus quoted the psalmist from the cross and said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because sometimes I feel that, Starting with the truth, though, I don't know another place to start. It may take us time to get there. That's okay. But we have to end up telling the truth if we're going to begin to inhabit some of these hard realities in a way that actually becomes a discovery process where we can weep and also experience a consolation that we're still in the hands of a loving God, and we're going to be okay.
So I worried about our topic, say beauty and suffering. I thought people stay home for that one. Childhood suffering. Anyway, so beauty, let me press that. If beauty and suffering, so Taylor said you taught a course that she was in on beauty and suffering. So if that's not, making it pretty or denying it or, he's in a better place, or whatever, that kind of thing. If it's not that, then what is it? When you teach this class, what are you hoping to?
I taught the class because I didn't know the answer to that question. And for me, just like writing, teaching a class is a discovery process. And so I thought, well, I don't understand this particular topic, but probably there's some smart Duke Divinity School students who do, so I'll teach a class on that, and then I'll just say, well, what do you think? And I learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned is that is what I mentioned before, and what you just mentioned, that this is not about a cover-up. This is not about trying to get God off the hook. God is going to be fine. Be as mad as you want. I will tell you, as someone who went through an experience of losing any sense that I had of God, and wondering, I think I'm an atheist now, which is disconcerting for a Southerner. And what ended up happening is that an image of God that had been profoundly meaningful to me and had been a source of joy and that I had encountered gratefully in prayer became too small for the world that I began to inhabit as I got older and saw different things about the world that I just didn't know about when I was 12. And so it had to go. I mean, I couldn't hold it in the room with the suffering that I was looking at, but the suffering was right there. And so something had to go, and since the suffering's there, well, I guess it's God. But over time, and that was very hard for me. It was, and I did not want that, and I did not choose that. I did not defiantly become an atheist and rage, No, not at all. I didn't want my worldview to dissolve. I simply found myself unable to believe in the God that I had always believed in. But that turned into a journey because I continued to want to know the truth. And I wanted true beliefs about the universe. I didn't want comfortable beliefs about the universe. I wanted true beliefs. I wanted to know the truth. And so I grew. I continued that journey. And it turned out that there is another way of seeing God. Now, there is no sense in which I am going to comprehend the completeness of God's truth, which means that for all eternity, I will be continually discarding my smaller version of God and trying to lean into this new thing that I've learned. It will be an ongoing discovery process simply because I am little. I can't take in all of God. The other thing is that if we won't let go of a small image of God, that image turns into a related thing, an idol. And this is what the prophets did. When they would castigate idolaters and when they would, tear apart images that were too small for God, it's not because at some point in the discovery of the divine, these images weren't a moment of opening our eyes to even the fact that there's a divine. But there comes a point where they are simply too small, and we're going to have to grow past them. And if we refuse to, at that point, the image is no longer serving to take us closer to the incomprehensible goodness of God. Now it's inhibiting us. Now it's keeping us from growing. It's like having, and we experience this in relationships all the time. We get to know someone, and we like them, and they like us, and we get married, and we have a honeymoon, and the first year is great, and then the second year starts.
Sorry.
Is your wife here?
Yes. Sorry.
It's a brave man right there. And we will say, wait a minute. You're more complicated than I thought. And we can do one of two things. We can either rejoice in the unknown and say, I am excited about learning more about who you are. Or we can spend the next decade trying to turn them into the image that we had of them, of what they're supposed to be, And of course, we all do some of that. But that feeling that we're all familiar with, of wanting this other person to be more like what they're supposed to be, which is to say, my image of them, we understand that. Well, think about that in terms of the living God. It's understandable that we would want to hang on to an image of God that we understand, that's familiar, that's close to our hearts, that hymns have been written about, that has meant a great deal to us our whole life. And it's not that we aren't grateful for it. It's not that it's not part of the truth. It's just not the whole truth. And so we keep growing in our relationship to God if we are going to say we have a living God, who's beyond us. What was your question?
Yeah, I don't know. Why doesn't my wife understand me?
Right, exactly, yeah. We'll keep working on her.
Yeah. So this is interesting. I'm looking around the room and I've spotted several people here who are of other faiths.
Yes.
And a couple of people who've shared with me they're not of any faith at all. I tend to, when I think about suffering, mortality, all those things, I tend by default to go to the cross of Christ, that it works for me. It makes sense about God. But loads of people obviously don't go there. What would you say? You have a patient who's Jewish, Muslim. How does that?
Well, I carry tracts around in my pocket. No, I told you I'm Southern. My favorite theologian is Thomas Aquinas. And it's not because I understand Thomas Aquinas, but it's because Thomas Aquinas put me back on the road of discovery when he said, the deepest thing we can know about God in this life is that we don't know what God is. And I thought that I could start with. I could begin with that because I was having a real problem with, not with suffering. If there's no God, and I'm just like, well, yeah, stuff just happens. But then I have to all of a sudden come up with some way to understand beauty, love, longing, joy, the mind, the connection of the mind to the world. There were so many things that I began to be challenged by because it wasn't satisfying to me that, if molecules bump in this direction, I think one thing, and if they bump in this direction, I think something else. That just didn't feel like the truth of the experience. That I love my daughter, Alexandra, if my brain molecules are going like this, and I don't love her if they're going like this. It felt like a degradation of some things that I held dear. And so that was what initially started me, not bringing me back to theism, just asking the question, could there be more to the story? And when Thomas Aquinas introduced me to this sense that the deepest thing that we can know about God in this life is that we don't know what God is, I found that very exciting. So did he, because he saw it not as a gesture of despair, we'll never know God. He also described God as the most knowable, even though we never come to know God fully, to comprehend God. Because there's a continual discovery process. For him, it was an exciting thing that we don't somehow have God contained in a simple little set of propositions, but instead that this God is so expansive that we never come to an end of discovery with God. So I loved that until I learned, not until I was supported by it, but he stole it from Augustine, who said, if you think you understand God, I assure you, the thing you understand is not God. And so, there's this kind of opening up of mystery that leaves me humble in relationship to a non-theist's search for what it is to live, to flourish, to love, for a Muslim's search for what it is to flourish and to find the truth of the world, for anyone's attempt And even if we are in a part of the country that it has a demographic that's more heavily Christian, when I look at a chart and it says Christian, I know almost nothing about what I'm going to discover in the room. Because I'm not even the same Christian I was, 2 years ago. And certainly 5 years ago, and 10 years ago, or when I was 8. So I'll tell you, I learned a lot about how to think Christianly about suffering from a Muslim. It was a Muslim whose son was dying, his 8-year-old son was dying, who I had been asked by, I'd never met the guy. He's fluent in English, fortunately. That took away, he's from the Middle East, but absolutely fluent in English. So we didn't have that barrier, but I had been asked to go talk with them, and I knew why. It's because they wanted me to get a DNR. They were distressed. The team was distressed, and understandably. The nurses were imagining doing chest compressions on this little kid who's in the middle. He's ventilated, he's on pressors, his kidneys have failed, his liver's failing, he's been on steroids for 2 months, he's osteopenic, so his bones are brittle, and they just imagined pushing on this kid's chest and feeling every rib crack, so that's the last experience that the child had. And they were like, we can't. Call Ray. I don't know what to say. And so I went in the room, and we began to talk. And I just asked questions about Islam. I asked questions about the Quran. I just asked questions, what does the Quran say about doctors? What does the Quran say about parenting? What does the Quran say about death? What does the Quran say about this, about that? And he, by answering questions, he had told the team, I don't care if you break every rib in his body. I want you to do CPR if his heart stops, right? And that was disorienting to them. So but the thing about it is, listening for the reason, beginning with the assumption, not that this is some barbaric person who just, the last thing they want to happen is for their kid to experience terrible pain before they die. No. You start with the assumption that this dad desperately loves his child and that he is torn between trying to do the right thing for his child and trying to be faithful to God. And how can you be faithful to Allah and honor your child if in your mind you're thinking, if I don't do chest compressions to the bitter last second, I am telling God that I have given up on God. I am telling God that I don't believe that a miracle can happen. That's what I'm telling God. If that's what you think, you are in a tough situation, because you're going to end up having to choose between what your sense is, I don't want my son to suffer, and your faith. And so I asked him questions about the Quran until he had told me the way out of that. And the way out of it, it turns out, is to recognize that, he told me, there are things in this world that we desire. And sometimes God says yes, and sometimes God says no. But whether God says yes or God says no, praise be to Allah. And I thought, that's right. As he talked to me about parenting and about what parenting is, he talked to me about the good things that we try to give our children. He also talked to me about protecting our children from harms without benefit as part of wisdom that God grants us in our parenting of children. And the problem with medicine is you don't always know which category that falls in. Is this next procedure a good thing I'm giving my child, or is this a harm without benefit that I should protect my child from before the juggernaut of medicine just rolls right over the top of my child? And so that requires a kind of discernment and a kind of clarity That's what a lot of palliative care is about trying to figure out, is this a good thing I'm giving my loved one? Or is this a harm without benefit that I want to protect my loved one from, right? Because both of those are gestures of love. And so he told me the way out. And it turned out by the end of the conversation, not by me telling him, but simply by asking questions and him quoting the Quran, that it became possible for him to protect his child from harm without benefit, in light of the fact that the doctors had told him, in their best judgment, that this would not help their child. The Quran allows you to believe the authority of the doctor when the doctor tells you you are overcome by your disease. It is time to prepare to die. The Quran allows you to listen to that because God has given the doctor a gift. And so that's okay. And so he came to a place where he could protect his child. He was acting in love towards his child and showing faithfulness to Allah at the same time. And I just said, thank you for teaching me about the Quran. Thank you so much. And left. I didn't even bring up DNAR. But 15 minutes later, they paged me and said, what'd you tell this guy? He just walked out of the room and asked us to put the DNAR in. And so this Muslim man taught me something about faithfulness, about honesty, about the agonizing struggle that we have when we carry responsibility of a decision for another person that we love. And he taught me about the importance of starting with the assumption that when someone is making a decision that looks crazy or brutal, check yourself. Make sure that you're not walking in with judgment, and begin instead with the assumption that they are doing the best that they can, that they are acting out of love. Begin there, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to see them or hear them or have regard for them or help them in any way. And so I learned from everyone, you know. That's my...
I hope you're hearing in this what you may not have come for tonight. I am. Which is, it's kind of a recipe for living and what would do our country a lot of good. And I think, what if everyone suddenly became humble, curious? And so, anyway, we need this thing. And the gift, so I think about this, the gift, I'm somebody who's easily confused about life and God and everything. And I always think I wrote this in a book years ago about my life, that I consider it fortunate that I do what I do for a living, not because, oh, it's so cool to be a pastor, but for instance, I talk to people whose marriages are in total disarray, and this makes me think differently about my wife and my marriage. I go in hospitals and I see people who are dying, who are all this. And that makes me think differently about my life. And it occurs to me that most people don't get to do that very often, right? They go in a hospital only when their mother is ill, or when, you know, it's a rarity that they get to go in there. So this gift of the regular facing of pain is a gift. I'm thinking about something in this podcast with Kate that really moved me. You were talking about how, in a way, your career changed over a girl named Allie. Tell us about Allie.
Allie, she, I need to listen to that podcast.
It's pretty good.
She was a young woman. She was when I first met her, she was 11. She turned 12. She was moving rapidly towards her mid-20s. Into her. She was beautiful and just dressed and always perfect, witty. I had to put her in timeout a couple times. She had no fear of me. And I just loved her. I loved her mom. Her mom was a very powerful soul, you know. She was a leader in business, and I was intimidated by her for the first, 2 months that I knew her, and she finally helped me relax. And Allie had multiply relapsed neuroblastoma. Now, she was old for neuroblastoma. Most of the time we see it in little kids, and she had started as a little kid. But the relapses had occurred over the course of 8 years. It was an unusual sort of case. And this happens sometimes with neuroblastoma. You can almost turn it into a semi-chronic disease for a while. It's a strange form of cancer. But her mom had the resources and the ingenuity and the drive to, go to California and to go to the Northeast and to go to Europe and to go wherever. If there was a treatment, she was going to find it. But she had no more options. And so she came to me. We were doing a kind of transplant where we used the parents. And that's a difficult thing because you get half your immune system from your mom and half from your dad, which means that you're only a half match. And most of the time, if you do a bone marrow transplant with a half match, the person's going to die of something called overwhelming graft versus host disease, where the graft that you put in attacks your whole body because it thinks your body is foreign. Your body doesn't look like the immune system. And so we were figuring out how to do this, and there had been one case report from Japan about a child who had been treated with this form of transplant, who had neuroblastoma, and he had gone into remission. And based on that one case report, we transplanted 2 kids, and Allie was one of them. So her neuroblastoma went away, which is astonishing. But her body also began to fall apart from the effects of the transplant itself. And over the course of several months, she became weaker, she became thinner, she began to hurt. She hurt everywhere, all the time. And it was painful to walk in the room and see the condition that she was in, especially because I had seen her when she was well. And that was where I learned that I prefer being a hero to being someone who is going to be present to a person who's dying after my best shot at curing them. And I didn't know how to let go. I had her in the intensive care unit multiple times. And there's this moment, I may have mentioned it with Kate, there's this moment I remember just because it's my rock bottom of denial and a refusal to let go in the name of hope. I walked in and she's on a ventilator and she's on pressors and her kidneys have failed and she's on dialysis and her liver is failing and her bilirubin, yours is probably 1.5, hers was in the 30s. And it had gone from, 36 to 34. And so I walk in to give the update. I'm like, good news, right? The bilirubin dropped from 36 to 34. Maybe we're making some progress, finding the one thing that I could talk about instead of talking about the extraordinarily obvious truth, that she was actively dying. And that she couldn't die because I wouldn't let her. because I was going to take over her heart, I was going to take over her lungs, I was going to take over her kidney, and by God, not on my watch. But there came a point where I realized that all of these machines that in many cases are life-giving are not themselves inherently life-giving, because they can give other stuff too, like prolonged suffering to someone who's begging to die because they're so miserable and they're not going to get better. And if somebody had a machine that they said, well, we've got this, this suffering prolonging machine, we can hook it up if you want. I'd be like, no. But that's not a way to frame that I could frame it. I couldn't frame it that way. I could not let her go. And let me tell you, feeling that from the inside taught me a profound grace and patience and understanding toward other people who are saying, put him on a ventilator, put him on dialysis, put him on anything, just keep him from dying. I get that. And I am gentle with people when they are wrestling with that. But I was the doctor, not the daddy. And I couldn't get there until one morning when I just somehow realized she's going to die. And if I keep doing dialysis, the only thing that I'm going to give her is one more day of pain. That is all she has to look forward to, because this is not going to get better, and her pain is going to get worse. So when I asked myself, what am I giving her? One more day of pain. And I thought, I have got to find it in me to at least have a conversation about something besides the next medical procedure. Maybe we'll keep doing it. I don't know. I certainly didn't know at that moment. Maybe we'll keep doing it. But I've got to find the courage to at least talk about something besides the next medical procedure. So I was driving in, I had to stop for gas, and her mom calls me. Hello? And she said, Ray, we've got to stop. The first thing she said, I said, hello? Ray, we've got to stop. That was an important moment for me, because we had both both of us were people who never give up. Never give up. It took us a lot to realize this wasn't giving up. This was telling the truth of the room. And it was acknowledging what we could give her and what we couldn't give her. And it was one of the first times that I started thinking in terms of the serenity prayer, for example. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And what I was lacking in that moment is the wisdom to know the difference. I simply could not acknowledge that she was going to die. But once I did, and I started looking at the truth of what her day looked like, the day that I was giving her with another round of dialysis, with another intervention, I was able to see her differently. And this is where maybe even beauty comes in. Because familiarity with a thing, kind of a rhythm, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. Why? Because that's what we do. And we just cycle in familiarity. Can also dull us. We all know that. Those of us who have either been married or had friends or known another human being for more than 2 weeks know that seeing a face for the first time is one experience, but that we can begin to be blind to the face of even our dear ones. Because, we see them all the time, we're just not noticing anymore. We're in a routine, blah, 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 blah. We can go decades without actually seeing the person we sleep with every night. But something about pain or suffering or the potential for loss is so disruptive and so disorienting that sometimes we see just at the moment that seeing is going to make us weep because we know what's being lost. We finally see this beauty in a way that we've never seen before at the moment that they're about to leave us. I've had that experience. I've had the experience of going home and looking at my wife differently because of seeing the transience of this good thing, this beautiful thing, this loved one, you know. So with Allie, we stopped dialysis, and a couple days later, she died. She taught me, though, to ask a different question when I walked into a room. I still enjoy being a hero. It's intoxicating to walk into a room and say, you know, I think I can cure your child. You know, nothing's 100%, but I'm really good at this. I think we can do this. There is something about the relief that the family feels when they hear, hey, you know, I've always thought of cancer equals death, but you're telling me cancer doesn't equal death, that you can do something to make cancer not equal death? You know, you are amazing. I'm like, go on. That's intoxicating. But you know what? No matter what, you know, people talk about palliative chemo as just being life extending. Guess what? All of medicine is just life extending. It's all palliative because we're all still going to die. And so walking into a room with a different sort of orientation that Allie initiated, it took me years of revisiting my own fears, you know? You would think walking into rooms with children who have diseases that we can't cure would have somehow made it dawn on me that I too might be mortal. It is amazing how tenacious our visceral denial of that is. And I don't mean denial factually. I mean my sense that my life is limited. And strangely enough, I'm in a situation where I don't know how much I have left. And yet, I have to decide whether or not to go to that committee meeting on Wednesday. Do I really want to trade an hour? What if I die on Thursday? Maybe I'll just skip it. But what if I don't die on Thursday? And on Friday, I don't have a job? Then I'm kind of stuck. So we're in this dilemma, you know? And the thing about it is, it's leaning into the dilemma. It's leaning into the transience, but also into the beauty, letting the transience itself rekindle our ability to be aware of beauty in the other's face. And I'm using that as a placeholder. There are many ways we could talk about this for hours. Now, you know, I started doing palliative care after, it was about probably 6 months after Allie died. We had a person who came up who it was the first person they'd ever hired to do palliative care. I didn't know what palliative care was. And so I went to find out, you know, palliative care, lecture on palliative care. I'll go and find out what palliative care is. The guy gives a lecture on palliative care. Most of it's pretty simple. But at the end of it, I thought, why aren't we practicing medicine like that? Like, why has no one talked to me about that kind of practice? And so I went and found him. And I said, you don't know me, but we're going to be friends. And I'm going to help you bring this into bone marrow transplant because we need this. I need this. Even when a patient's going to survive, I need this way of thinking about this. And that's changed my whole practice. My practice in bone marrow transplant, in oncology, and in palliative care, which is part of what I do now. I leaned into my fear. I leaned into the thing that hurt me the most. until I knew how to do it. And I still mess it up, as I said at the beginning. But that has reminded me that if there's one thing about beauty that is an almost non-negotiable condition, it's that the beautiful thing has limits. It has a contour. It has a shape. It's not every color, it's this color. It's this tall, it's this wide. And these limits are part of how beauty shows up. If there were no limits, if it was just like, some infinite sublime or something like that, it'd be more like a math equation than like something we can witness in beauty. And that has sort of stuck with me because even though I strike myself as someone who, generally speaking, is better off alive than dead, I would rather be alive than dead. I like life. It's weird to me that I'm going to die. That's a strange thought to me that I will be dead someday. But nonetheless, even though I don't think I personally would have set things up like this, with all deference to God, they are set up like this. And so, since that is the truth I can't change, grant me serenity. The thing I can change is the way that I see a thing. Is there a way that I can see this world filled with limits, including the limit of my own life, in such a way that the limit itself wakes me up to the beauty and value of the thing, of the person, of the moment? And so in that sense, limits and my experience of what is beautiful and what is valuable, what is precious, what is not to be squandered, those two things now track side by side. And if I find myself becoming lazy, becoming dull, becoming unable to see, just sort of in a fog, I try to return to a sense of the truth of things, which is a truth that is inseparable from limit. When I look at my wife, when I look at my child, when I look at my dog, I have a dog named Sophie, and I have a box with a dog named Emma in it, because we had to cremate Emma, because she died. And I look at Sophie, and that box is right there in the same room. And I give Sophie a chewy. I love her in ways that a dog can receive. And I enjoy her. I see her, she's beautiful to me. But if I simply took her for granted and stopped seeing her, that would be a great loss. And it's certainly true in our other relationships as well. So it's not just death that pediatric oncology teaches me. It's just a reminder, stay awake. And value this person. You go to Chick-fil-A, hey, what would you like? I'll take a Chick-fil-A sandwich, because it's Chick-fil-A. And
my pleasure.
What's that?
They always say, my pleasure.
My pleasure. Is it your pleasure? Is it, thank you for that. And then, but one day, next time you go to Chick-fil-A, feel the difference between, I'll have 2 Chick-fil-A sandwiches and some waffle fries. Here's my credit card, where you don't even look at the person. And just take one moment and catch their eye. Just look at them one moment and feel the difference between our usual sort of instrumental way of we've got machines and people who hand us chicken sandwiches, and they're basically in the same category in a fast food world. Well, I can see this person differently. That is a change I can make. And in that moment, whatever that change is, whatever that feeling is, that's what I'm talking about. That's what attending to limits in our lives can rekindle in us. And we have to return to it and return to it and return to it. So the children actually, that's what they do for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It took me a long time to say, but
it was wonderful. I think so our whole series on beauty, I think, in my mind, is geared toward helping us to define beauty differently, to see it in unexpected places. I kept thinking about as a doctor, you want to do something. So I'm thinking about the little girl that we took to Duke, and I was just sitting in the corner doing nothing, feeling like I have a PhD in theology and I'm useless. And the way that night ended was interesting. I kept thinking, I need to just go home. And I was trying to think of the words to say. I didn't know what to say. I was going to say, like, I am so sorry you have such a dud of a pastor. I didn't know what to say. That wasn't their issue, right? And so I was getting ready to go, and it was very late, and Caroline had cried and cried and cried. I think they were going to do surgery the next morning, and the parents just were exhausted, and I was about to walk out the door, and they said, we are so exhausted, and we got the surgery in the morning. We really wonder if we could take a nap. Could you hold her? Mm-hmm. And they handed me this crying child, and I rocked her for a few minutes, and then she fell asleep. And the ugly part of me at first thought, well, you went to div school and you got a PhD for this. And then I thought, yeah, all my training, all of my life, everything was preparing me for that moment. And it was a beauty that I didn't expect or want, but it's one of the kind of tenderest moments in my life, beauty and suffering. I hope, by the way, in hearing Ray talk, in our country, medicine's so politicized, and everybody talks about it. Everybody's got health care plans, and people get all mad about it. And then I hear people often talking about, the shifting medical practices in town, and who's your doctor, and the doctor quit, and you have to go to another medical, and it just makes people crazy. And sometimes people complain to me about doctors. Most doctors that I know are like you. And I hope you hear that. Like, you see them, they're under the press of a schedule, and somebody's outside saying, you got to see this next patient. I mean, that's the reality. But the doctors that I know, when I talk to them off hours, they grieve, they worry, they love, they second guess themselves, I hope you hear that. Yeah. That's like a real thing that I think changes the equation of kind of healthcare for all of us. If we could remember, like next time you go to Chick-fil-A, next time you go to the doctor, right? Mm-hmm. Think, there's a human being with her own hurts and fears and struggles. And it's a beautiful thing. What time is it, Taylor? I'm going to call time at 8:30, but now, Ray and I love listening to people. We've said that. But this isn't the time. This is a time for a question. If you have a speech, come tell us later. But if you have a question...
Do children understand death or fear death? At what age? I'm kind of thinking maybe 7 to 10,
It's interesting. So developmentally, around 6 seems to be when they start to be able to have a concept of death. My first memory was when I was 4. My grandmother, my dad's mom, died in the morning, and my dad's dad died in a different hospital that evening, and no one had told him that she died. So both parents died on the same day of different things in different hospitals. And I remember my first memory as being 4 years old, and my dad was holding me, and my grandfather was against one wall in the funeral home, and my grandmother was against the other in their coffins. And I remember them just being there. And I was not feeling anything in particular until my dad started crying. And then when I saw him cry, I started to cry. But I remember distinctly that it was not because they were dead. And in my experience with kids, I do think that around 6, they start to have a true concept of what death is. There's a woman named Myra Bluebond Langer who wrote a book called The Private Worlds of Dying Children. And in it, she's an anthropologist, and she spent a year on a pediatric oncology ward. It turns out children know who's who. And so they know that when the nurse comes in, the nurse can do some things that are not fun, and they know that the medical student probably can't do much of anything. And the intern can write orders that might mean the nurse is going to come in and do something not fun. And then there's a resident, and then there's a fellow, and then there's an attending who apparently is in charge but is almost never around. And they understand this hierarchy. But she had no power. And so they would let her sit with them. And she would watch TV and she would talk with them. She did this for a year. And what she discovered about the things children know about dying was astonishing. They very often know that they're going to die when no one has told them. They very often are concerned that no one tell their parents because their parents will get upset. And so they protect their parents from this knowledge. But no one's told them they're going to die. They just know. And this was important information because very often as parents, if we have a child who is going to die and we're trying to decide, do we tell them? Or how do you do this? I've never done this before, right? Well, nobody knew how to do it. But after Myra Bluebond Langer, people started saying, well, maybe we should look into it. And so a lot of studies started coming out to understand this more. And one was a big study with over 400 parents who had children who were old enough to talk, and the children died. And the researchers asked 3 questions. They said, did you talk to your child about dying or not? And it turned out that 1/3 of them said yes, and 2/3 said, no, we didn't. The second question that they asked was, do you regret your decision? It's an interesting question. About 50% of the people who did not talk to their kids said, no, we don't regret it. It was the right decision. Which means about 50% said, oh yes, we regret it. If we could go back, we would change it. And the people who did talk to their kids, none of the parents said they regretted their decision. The third question they asked, last one, was an attempt to find out what predicted regret among parents who didn't talk to their children about dying. And the biggest predictor of regret was the suspicion that they might already know, but they still didn't talk to them. That was the biggest predictor of regret. If the parents had a suspicion that their child knew they were going to die, but they still didn't talk to them, then they experienced regret. Now, this is hard information. These parents are bearing their souls. I just whipped out the study. This cost these parents. They are having to talk about the hardest moment in their life. So it's important to understand that. But that information that they gave is a profound gift. Because I have had so many parents who have wondered, I didn't know before I saw this. I did not answer that question. How do you answer a question like that? I don't know if you should talk with them or not. But so many parents have been helped. If I ask them, do you think that your child might know? Or if we've got information like from a nurse who said, yeah, the kid told me that he knows. If they understand that in that kind of situation, they might want to revisit the possibility of opening up some space to talk about it. That's been incredibly helpful. So little kids under 6, I truly believe that there are kids who simply because they've had chemo for 4 years of their life understand some things. But I also think that you don't have to have a concept of death to have a fear something is not right. And that is one of the purest examples that I know of a central gift that we can give, presence, holding, rocking. Because the only thing that eases that sense, I am not okay, I'm not right, something's wrong, is to be held, to be told, I am here, you are not alone. You're not alone. You know, it makes a huge difference. And you don't have to be a little kid. I will need that. And I will be afraid. I need someone to hold me and tell me, you're not alone. You know. So, yeah, that's a... Have you noticed that I can't give a short answer? Okay.
I'll take one more and then we're going to call time. Anybody else?
Yeah, yeah.
You talk about suffering versus the decision to one more day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it goes on for 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
in our case, 4.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you fall? Because I've heard from the God guys, like Dr. Howell said, and I've heard from doctors.
Yeah.
I love that I can hear from someone that's both. If the choice is shorter time and less suffering, or the extended time, it's very hard. That is when it's a loved one, that is tough.
It's agony.
Where, how do you make it make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
You may not have heard that. He lost his mom a couple years ago after a very long bout with cancer, and he was asking the question of, and I've heard people parse this in front of me, including your family, actually. Do you say, let's have less time, and it's better, or more time, but it's more agonizing because of treatments and such? Basically is the question. How do you make sense of all that?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm struggling for an answer, okay, with you. And if we talk in 10 years, I will still be struggling for an answer. Because this is not the kind of thing like figuring out, how many sides there are to a benzene ring. This is not that kind of thing. And we're always going to be in gray and in uncertainty. And we're always going to be agonizing over this question, because there is not going to be a formula or anything else that's going to be handed down that is going to say, oh, well, now we no longer have to wrestle with the question. This just is part of the human condition. And if you take either decision to an extreme, you can see that it's not obvious that one is good and one is bad. And so if you say, well, we want just one more day, just no matter what, and you put them on cardiac bypass, and you put them in the intensive care unit, cannulated with, and sedate them because every time they move, their pressure drops. And you're doing all of this just to keep blood going round and round, right? That is an extreme especially the thing we call ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, that we don't even offer it. We wrestle over CPR, but we have no problem saying, no, we're not using ECMO. No problem. We don't even ask. We're just like, ain't happening. We don't offer heart transplants to people who have stage 4 cancer and they're about to die. They've got anthracycline toxicity of their heart, so they're probably going to die now. If we did a heart transplant on them, they might be alive next week. Yeah, they've got stage 4 cancer that's progressive, but at least they'd have one more week. No, we're not going to do a heart transplant. We just say no. And when we put that option in terms of an extreme, we can see, oh, okay, well, it's not like always good to add one more day. Take the other one, though. You say, well, we want to, we want to cut suffering short, even if it means less days of life. In fact, what we're going to do, since this person is suffering, is we're just going to give them a really huge dose of morphine and let them die right now. We're going to euthanize them. So euthanasia is a complicated topic, and that would be a completely different discussion. But one thing that I would offer as the extreme version of that is that, yes, it's true that getting rid of the sufferer will get rid of the suffering, but that's not always obviously okay. And where your family was living is in between. You weren't going to get rid of the sufferer in order to get rid of the suffering. You weren't going to euthanize her, but you weren't going to ask the doctors to do a lung transplant or something like that. So you're wrestling and struggling through the day. So the first thing I would want to say is look at extremes, and you can see it's not obvious that one thing is good and one thing is bad, which I only mention so that we can have grace towards ourselves, so that we can let go of the idea that somehow we should have had clarity. And instead remember, just like I was talking about with this Muslim dad, that we are doing the best that we can in the middle of an impossible situation, and that we are acting out of love. And yes, we're struggling with our own fears, but we are primarily acting out of love. We are trying. And no one gave us a handbook to tell us what to do. And so because it's not obvious at one extreme or the other extreme that this one's good and this one's bad, we have to have grace towards ourselves as we try, as we struggle in the middle, And I don't know another way to get to a decision for today than to gather around, wrestle with it, disagree, ask questions, be sleepless, pray, read books, talk to your pastor, struggle, because there's not another option, this is heresy, but I have mixed feelings about advance directives. Mixed feelings. Genuinely mixed, because I absolutely see the value of them. But I also kind of want my family to struggle. We do everything else together. We struggle over finances. We struggle over who's going to cut the grass. We struggle over who's going to load the dishwasher. This is really important. I'm not going to just make a unilateral decision in this. Let's struggle with it. And so that's part of the reason why I feel like the first thing is grace towards ourselves, not expecting some sort of certainty in there, especially in retrospect. Remember, we did our best. We loved the best we could. And then the second thing is, surround yourself with your people, with your community, and expect disagreement. But wrestling is the human condition. Let's do that. That's my answer.
We, last night, a bunch of you I know were here to hear Lemmy Pulliam sing. He's a world-class opera tenor. And what I thought at the time, it's not just, he was the most amazing voice I've ever heard. He sang the right notes. It was great. But what I thought, though, was that as he sang, I felt myself close to the heart of God in that moment. It seems to me, if you're where I am tonight, we've been with a doctor, a theologian. I could say you've been brilliant, and you have been, but that's almost beside the point. For me, at least, I feel like you've taken us very close to the heart of God tonight. We're grateful. Join me in thanking.
Thank you.